You're listening to the StoryShout podcast, hosted by Kelsey Jones. We're a weekly podcast dedicated to destigmatizing failure and laughing at our normalcy. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.
Hi everyone, welcome to StoryShout. My name is Kelsey Jones, and I'm joined here today by Geoffrey Cologne. He is a colleague of mine in the marketing industry. We met a long time ago at a marketing conference, and so I'm so glad that you're here.
Yeah, glad to be here. And I would definitely say I'm a colleague because, anybody who works in marketing is a peer for others, trying to figure out where the world is going. So, yeah.
Right. I love that up here. So what topic did you want to tackle today? It's a big one.
Yeah, I think we have to look at the sort of culture of innovation that's out there in the business world and how much we want to package that up and make it tidy and neat and, present it on a silver platter as this notion of it's all orderly when innovation is filled with mistakes and failures and chaos. And that's okay. I think that doesn't fit the narrative that business has pushed for the last 100 plus years in this area. So I'm just here to speak to anyone who deals with innovation, which is sort of all of us, Kelsey, in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
That it's okay to be frustrated and to fail, even if management doesn't really like that. It's just how you find the future, and that's just always the way I think it's going to work.
Yeah, I feel like whenever we talk about innovation or success as a whole, nobody talks about the failures that led to that point, like failing forward. It's always about the final product and where you're at now instead of where you've come from.
Yeah. And also I think what's been ruined too is diatribes like fail fast. I mean, what kind of BS is that? Most things when you think about failure, you have to look at it in the eye of like artists. You have artists who can create things and they just create them off the top of their head. But then you have other artists that it's constantly a way to get better and improve themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can learn from those who are actually on the second side. It's like, I'm constantly asked in my position, hey, how did you come up with this particular idea? And I'll say, that's actually from 5 or 6 years of experiments. And they're like, wait, but it came out this year. Well, yeah, nothing just shows up, right away for you. And I think that's where this fail fast is a little ludicrous, because what it's basically saying is like, hey, if you feel like you're actually not going to get to the end point or the hypothesis that you're making, then bail on that and try to do something else. If we can learn from the scientific community, we wouldn't have a vaccine if we looked at it with the world with the fail fast mantra. I don't know why modern business has adopted that. I think it's just rubbish.
Yeah, I think they're trying to say like they're trying to accept failure, but what it comes across is like fail and get it over with so we can move on to like things that actually work. That's really what it's saying is like just get it over with. Yeah. And that's not the case. That's not what ever happens.
Yeah, Kelsey, it's like sweep it under the rug. Like, let's hide it, or you can talk about it at our next team meeting and then let's like move forward. Whereas right. Again, if you draw from like my favorite artist in the world is Cezanne. I mean, he was constantly trying to improve on things. I mean, he would slash a lot of his art because he was so frustrated with it. But what he would learn from that is, hey, how can I, get better at this? That's why his pieces got better over time rather than like, hey, I could just do something as a one-off. I think we have to come to the realization that there are just different people in the world, that there are some people who can do things amazing on the first try, and there's and those, I would say that's 1% of the people in the world. And then there's the rest of us, the 99%, where we constantly have to iterate to learn, and we have to fail in order to learn, because that's just the way, life is. Most of us did not know how to successfully walk when our parents, basically said, hey, we're trying to, we're going to put you down and figure out if you can go from crawling to walking. Most of us fell, but we learned, what took to basically, walk. And I think we just forget a lot about that in business. There's just a lot of, terrible stories and bad books and awful thought leaders that, I just, it makes for a good show. I mean, it would be great to have some of those, false idols, up where you can just like debate them and basically call them out for like the snake oil salespeople that they are.
Yeah, I feel like with thought leaders, it's like, oh, I failed one time 20 years ago, and now I'm at the top of my game and I make millions a month. Like they never talk about a current failure. It's always like, when I was 18, I had a paper route that didn't work out.
Exactly. I mean, we're constantly failing. I think someone, said to me recently, hey, one of the things I don't like, Jeff, about the world of social media and the real world is people put on a face on social media that they're afraid to really be who they are. And, my response to that is, hey, I'll be honest with you. I'm who I am on social media. If you meet me in real life, I have no clue what's going on half the time, Kelsey. I mean, I admit that I don't know what's going on and I make it up as I go. I think a majority of leaders actually do that, but they're afraid to say that because you have to save face. It's not a good way to be promoted at a company, and it doesn't show true leadership. But what I found is a lot of people actually enjoy leaders and mentors who are like that, who are just honest about, yeah, I don't really know what the answer is there. I don't have the answer. I'm trying to figure that out. Life is a work in progress. I'm just like everybody else. I think we're moving into a leadership state, and I think the pandemic has caused this, where it's okay to just admit that you are a human and don't have all the answers to everything. And that separates us from the last decade, which was, hey, you should act and think like a computer. You should be like software. It's like, no, software does that. I'm a human. I do this. And that's where we're sort of moving. And I think that's what we miss when we talk a lot about innovation, is sort of the human ingenuity that, we should all be part of Team Human. We should enjoy being humans and the flaws and mistakes that we have, rather than, hey, how do we recode that so we can get rid of that flaw? Anybody who talks like that is just run as far away from those people as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I think humanizing work and humanizing like life is kind of what I've been trying to do with this podcast. And in terms of work, like I've noticed as a manager, if I am more human, my team is more human with me and more transparent and honest because they feel like I've done that with them. This was a while back, but at one of my jobs, we had a training that was like anti-harassment and like workplace etiquette. And the teacher, who's this teacher they brought in, she gave us a pop quiz and she said, okay, so here's a pop quiz, everybody answer. If you're having a bad day and you're going into work, what do you do? And it was the answers were leave it at the door, rant to like a coworker about it, or the other one was like stupid. It was like explode on someone or like take it out, something that no one would pick. Anyway, most people picked the second one, vent to a coworker. And so they showed our answers, and then she got on and she was like, no, you need to leave it at the door. You need to leave personal things at home, and work things need to stay in the office. And I agree with that to a point. Like I have had weird experiences at work where somebody's I don't know very well is telling me something personal that I don't need to know about. But then I've also had great experiences where someone has shared their life with me, and that's helped me be a better coworker to them, a better manager to them, help them if they are my boss. And so I think there's a lot more value to telling, maybe the team you talk to every day, hey, I'm not having the best day. Don't even go into it. or like say, hey, I failed at this. Here's where I'm at. I don't necessarily need anything. I just want you to know this is what I'm processing with. And I do think that that's really helpful.
I love that you shared that because I do think it's helpful. And I do think there are certain things, as you said, where it's a barrier. You don't need to share or overshare everything at work that may deal with your personal life. Then there are other things where I do like hearing from other people, like if they say, hey, Jeff, I'm dealing with, sick parents at the moment. They're older and I got to take care of them. And that's why I've been, maybe not in some of the meetings because I got to rush out to them, at this time. I mean, I understand that from a place of empathy. I want to hear those things. I want to hear if like someone might be, struggling in certain ways, because it isn't to say like, hey, I have the answer for you. A lot of times they just need to talk to someone, Kelsey. And I think that's good to lend an ear,
Right.
especially a work colleague, if it is, related to work. As you've noted, I think a lot of us are talking a lot more about mental health than we had in the past couple of decades. There's, several people who've told me, hey, here's what I may suffer from. Some people have told me they have depression. Some people have told me they have anxiety. Others have told me that they, suffer from dyslexia. I've been a little more open over the fact that I have ADHD, and I'm not really, afraid of people saying like, oh, okay, this person, can they, keep everything sort of straight and orderly? There's ways you just function with these
Right.
things, and that's just how you sort of get through. It's similar to having issues with physical health in a lot of ways. Like if you hurt your ankle and you're on crutches, you sort of use crutches to navigate. It's the same thing with a lot of the things that we deal with mental health, and I think that's okay to continue to have these conversations because again, we wanted to separate work and life very much, but now everything is blurred because we are working at home. So work and life is all blurred together. I would love to have a barrier that separates the two, but that's just not the case for a majority of us. And so we should just be open to, I think, sharing some experiences that allow people to realize we're all in this together. We're all on this rock moving around space, and we're trying to sort of figure out things as we go.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think that ties back to what we talked about at the beginning, like the idea of being open about failure. And I think you touched on something earlier about the thought leaders that I wanted to circle back to that I thought of is this culture of fear around failure and how like fear and failure are so deeply enrooted in each other that you can be so afraid to fail, you don't even try at all, and then you're failing. Like at least for me, like whenever I'm scared to try something new, if I don't do it, then at least I know the outcome. I know that I didn't do it. So it's like pre-failing before I fail, but then I'm not doing the thing. Like I had wanted to start a podcast for forever, and then I'm finally like, I'm just doing it and it's fine. I'm doing it. And I just think like, I just would be interested to hear your thoughts on like how fear and failure are connected and how that could affect like innovation or just failure as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, innovation is a lot about trying to figure out the unknown, and fear and failure tie into that because you're basically trying to solve for something you don't know, and you're like, okay, if we don't solve for this, or we can't come up with a solution for this, what ends up happening? Like, do we basically, fail in those circumstances? And failure is very lonely if you think about it. I mean, it's lonely in the first place to be, to work on things that are innovative, because if you think about it from like a pioneer standpoint, you're basically the person that, I'll use Star Trek as an analogy. You're off in the far, reach of the universe trying to sort of explore worlds no one else has explored. That's lonely, Kelsey. That's a very lonely sort of situation to be in. At the same time, most of us have imposter syndrome. We're like, oh, if we do this the wrong way, like we're just going to be ridiculed to no end and possibly even lose our jobs. So you have the fact that you're alone to begin with because you're trying to figure out where things are going, and then you're maybe alone if you fail. Those, I mean, if we think about it from, a human emotion standpoint, I mean, there's nothing really good in that situation. On the flip side, if you're out there alone and you discover something and you're able to bring that back to everybody else and share that, that's when you get accolades. Wow, this is amazing. We can't believe that this is where things are headed. This is a great discovery. But that is usually what is celebrated in culture, and that probably only makes up about 1% of innovation. I'd say 99% of innovation is the cold, dark outer reaches of the universe and space. And hey, we failed a lot and we're not going to be able to really, get back to everybody else. And they basically, send you a communication, don't bother coming back. We don't need you back here. So it's a very lonely place, I think, to exist. And as humans, we don't want to be lonely. We're social animals by design. And so I think that's why most of us don't really move into, we don't like to be part of those scenarios. It's easier to follow others and just be part of a pack, because that again, we get social acceptance from that, Kelsey. It's like, hey, I'm part of this team. I'm part of everybody else. Let's just sort of follow and do what's necessary. The stagnation of all that, though, is that you don't really, there's a need, I think, to discover things. Again, I think people who like innovation are a lot like artists. They have a need to create. That's something within them. And they're okay if people ostracize them, because they're okay with the fact that, yeah, most people may not really understand what we're trying to do. They almost wear that as a badge of honor. And we've seen this with a lot of people. I think, when you think of computer code, most of the people who did computer code in the early days of computer code were women. And the reason that they just basically said, hey, you're going to do this, is because no one really cared about that. It wasn't until it became glamorous and filled with innovation that you had all these sort of, men saying, okay, I'm going to get involved in this as well. When you think about all the cult of personality of like a founder, oh, look at that, business and, how much it's worth. What nobody really sees is that the person basically had to sell most of their belongings to pay the rent for some periods of time. When you really look at some of these stories, most of them are filled with a lot of failure and sacrifice, but that doesn't make for good storytelling. That doesn't fit hustle culture. That doesn't fit, a thought leader writing things on LinkedIn to get people to buy their practical guide on how they can find success, which I have to tell you, anybody who's found success is not selling a $99 educational class on how to find success. So stop spending your money with those people.
Yes, agree with you on that. I feel like whenever people say like, I have a multi-million-dollar business, buy my guide, it's like, well, they make their money because you buy the guide,
Yes.
Not really because they've done anything of substance. A lot of times, not all the time. But one thing you talked about that's really interesting to me is the idea of alienation of the people that make the very innovations that we come to rely on. So if you think about technology that people were conceptualizing for, a decade and went through that process of alienation just because it was so completely out of what people could even think of in a realm of something they would use all the time. And then all of a sudden it becomes useful enough or is explained in the right way where it can become mainstream. It's then accepted and it's like, oh, how could I have lived with this without, for my whole life without it?
Yep.
That was kind of a jumble of words, but you know what I mean? Like it's very interesting to me how,
Yep.
like, I'm trying to think of good examples like smartphones or Wi-Fi or like other technology is the examples I keep thinking of, but even like people who do things in a different way. Like I saw a meme about Uber that was like 10 years ago, never get in a stranger's car. Now,
Yep.
here's an app to like seek out strangers to get in their car. Like, but if you think about it, like if you had told me about Uber 10 years ago, I'd be like, what the hell? I'm not doing that.
Exactly.
But now that's the only thing I use, and I hate using taxis. I'm not going to use a taxi. But I mean, it's just like so mind blowing to think about, like the very people that have created the things that you use every day were once ostracized or alienated because of they had the ideas that they did.
Innovation is filled with eccentricity and eccentrics.
Yes.
Most of the people who work on things that are innovative were, made fun of at school, probably never were allowed to sit at a table with particular people. Those same people, I must say, all use these technologies now, but they ostracize all those people who are basically responsible for this. A lot of it is because they just see the world different, Kelsey. And we, again, because we're social animals and we want to be part of a herd or a tribe, that is not really looked, well upon in terms of, hey, you're thinking a little bit different than everybody else here in the group. Can you at least, focus on what needs to happen here?
Right.
This is why I think most people who, are entrepreneurial do go out on their own when they want to find things that are innovative. And we're not just even talking about, products. What you noted with Uber is really a service per se. They see things a little bit differently in terms of, hey, here's a service that we could provide that's not being provided out there. One area I see this quite a bit of is in the creative space. When I talk to a lot of agencies, now you have solopreneurs and like individual creators that are like, hey, I can do this work for you, Jeff, and here's what I charge. And you're like, why didn't we have this system before? Why did I always have to go to like an agency that required me to sign and them on as an agency of record? And the reason why is because people are starting to see different solutions that are available to them and want to offer those. And instead of quickly ostracizing folks for some of that different thinking, we should just basically have a pause and say, that's very interesting. I am going to keep sort of a watch on what may happen. A good example of this is, and we can see it throughout history. 20 years ago, there were so many people who were like, hey, you got to watch the website space. There's going to be a business model that comes from .coms. And of course, there were people who said, you're out of your mind. That'll never happen. Of course, you had the .com bust and you had all those people laughing, saying the internet is never going to really be anything.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it ramps up and it basically changes how we function. Same thing with the social media era. Hey, you should check this out. Friendster, MySpace. No, that's going to have no effect whatsoever on how we actually consume anything. And of course, now we're buying things off of TikTok. And you have to always watch whatever the next space is. And I always look at the same people, and they're cut from a particular cloth, who are like, that will never have any effect whatsoever. These are usually people who are very conformist by design. They may have like an advanced degree. They may come from sort of a privileged background. And the reason I bring that up is because economics are heavily involved in why some people don't want things to change, because you might have an economic basis for, well, wait a minute, I don't want any of this stuff to change, because if it changes, then I'm going to have to like reinvent myself. Meanwhile, what they're never taught is that you constantly have to reinvent yourself. That's just part of life. You're not the same person now that you were 20 years ago or that you were 40 years ago. And so again, those narratives stick that like you can just be one way for the rest of your life. And I think it's always interesting to, watch people who sort of are like naysayers on things. That's happening, I think, in sort of the NFT and crypto and blockchain space. I was hesitant toward much of that as well. I wasn't a naysayer. I wasn't saying like that's never going to go anywhere. I just was like, hey, I'm going to watch this and just see where it may end up. And you know what? It may end up like the .com and the social media era before it, falling flat on its face, but it may also have an effect where it goes upward again. And you have to pay attention to how that affects, the overall world. I mean, we know that the personal computer has had a huge effect on how we look at the world. But early on in the 70s and 80s, everyone laughed, saying that'll never have an effect. No one is ever going to have a personal computer at home. It's just too expensive and too costly. Now we don't even bat an eyelash when we go out and buy a laptop or go and buy a phone or do all these other things that we do in sort of these online spaces. And so I think we should pay attention to people who everyone goes, those people are nuts or those people are crazy. Because I think eccentrics really do shape the world, but it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is that a mainstream person who wears a power suit is the one that sort of dictates the rules. That's all BS. They're just scared of the fact that really weird people run the world when it comes to business.
You're so right. And I feel like we are at a transformative period in our history where people are saying, no, we are changing this. Like, you give a good example with like crypto and blockchain. Like, a lot of people are discounting it because it is something that's hard to understand. But a lot of people, I think that it's going to become more successful because people are sick of the way that like banking and payments is done.
That's right.
It's so rigid. I remember, God, this was 5 years ago. I wanted to buy Bitcoin. My bank literally would not let me. They said that is a volatile thing. They literally wouldn't let me transfer money. I think I had like Coinbase or something similar. They literally would not let me do it. And oh my God, I was so mad. I'm like, it's my freaking money. I can do what I want. And I think people are just sick of like they being like banking and like big corporations running everything when really they should be serving us as the consumers, as the experts, as like society. We should be the ones running everything, not these big companies that are telling us how to work, how to spend our money, what to spend our money on, where to spend it. That is not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be people supporting one another through means that nobody can control. I mean, you look at like what happened with OnlyFans, like MasterCard trying to control the adult industry.
Yep.
That's not going to make porn go away. Another platform, there's already competitors. They're just going to get all the OnlyFans people and it's going to go on. You're not stopping anything. If you actually embraced like innovation and like people wanting to do what they want with their own time, with their own money, with their own creativity, with their own body, you'd be a lot far ahead and you would get the respect of the very customers that you're trying to facilitate to. But no, most of these companies are so stuck in their ways of like, no, this has always worked for us. This is how it works. We run everything. And that's just not going to work anymore.
I think it's quite interesting you bring up OnlyFans because, anybody who's studied like the history of innovation, it's weird, I'm going to bring this up, but like pornography has always been innovative in terms of its business models. Again, this isn't, a discussion on like, hey, what are the merits of pornography? I remember taking a class in college around, the politics of pornography, like that was offered by the political science department. That was quite interesting in terms of where it was going, the pros and cons of it. But you just have to look at the fact that you had an industry that moved away from film to videotapes long before the film industry did, to DVD, to Blu-ray, to online. And think about this, Kelsey. Think about this for a second. The way that you pay for anything on the internet is because of the porn industry. Think about that for a second. The idea of a cart is actually from the porn industry. So even though you might be like, that's never provided anything of any value to society, it does. It allows you to go on Amazon and buy things and any other e-commerce site for that matter, because that's where that innovation comes from. So my point is that we have a tendency of not looking at the fringe, not looking at things that are not mainstream, because again, there are always going to be rules and process on what, companies should and, should not do. And when you're in the game of innovation, you sort of borrow from every sector, because you're not so worried about, hey, is that the right way to do it? You're like, that's an interesting way to do it. Let's just examine that, especially when you're doing research. So I think it's interesting that you brought OnlyFans up, because it's been in the news as of lately, because it is a pretty interesting model that is being revamped, mainly because of they can't get investors, because the investors are almost weary of like, well, we don't want to invest in this platform. So but that's sort of where all creators, monetization systems, I should say, is headed, is this ability to say, hey, I'm going to subscribe to you, I'm going to pay a fee, I'm going to tip you, and you're going to offer whatever it might be. And that's in every type of model. I'm thinking of people who may provide like video editing services, do things that you and I might do, search engine, optimization or marketing. Like, I do think there's all these new systems that we should be looking at and figure out how to take advantage of them.
Right. And I think that goes back to what you were saying, like with the pornography industry, like, and thinking of it more of a whole as like the fringes of society are the true innovators, and the ones that are ostracized are the ones that are actually leading what's going to be normalized in the next, like, I don't know, like 3 to 10 years, is like the people that are on the fringes that are actually doing things that move the needle.
Well, yeah, I mean, and if you think about any like movements in culture and society, that's always been the case. I mean, we're sitting in 2021. We have, human rights movements, gay rights movements, women's rights movements, every type of movement around, let's say more humanity or more of an encouragement around humans. If we reverse and go back to like the 50s and 60s, that was on the fringe. You had, small groups of people saying, hey, wait a minute, this is not a psychological disorder for me to be gay. This is not an issue for me to be a woman and asking for equal pay in the workplace. That all starts as a fringe and then moves much more mainstream. The entire technology industry was fringe. It was people basically doing stuff out of like their garages for years, building stuff that ultimately becomes much more mainstream. How we look at e-commerce, it's not, that's all fringe. That was people saying, I think people are going to buy stuff online. Let's figure out if they'll do that. Most of those were .com busts that blew up in 2000 and 2001 because there just wasn't the ecosystem of people supporting that. Kelsey, we don't even think twice about clicking buy, when we purchase things now online. That's very mainstream. That was all fringe. So the thing is, how do you find what's fringe next, especially in a world where culture moves much faster because of the internet? There are no longer like these niche pockets that are out there without being exposed quicker. But they are there. There are always people thinking of like, hey, how do I solve something here because I want to do something that's a little bit different from the way it's always been done. I think that's why you have these de-financial sort of movements going on, because people are sick of, I don't want my bank to tell me sort of how I have to do this. Why do I have to have $10,000 in this bank account or I get charged a fee? I think they've just looked at some of these companies as, they're just trying to do things to make a quick buck. I think airlines are another issue that we, travel, another issue we've always looked at, which is why you have a huge movement toward things that aren't, hotels or taxis, as you've noted before. There's all that. And I think there's just more room for sort of that eccentric thinking, because that is just part of innovation.
Yeah, I agree. So I could talk to you about this all day, but I think we're almost at our time. But, do you have any final thoughts on like where you think we'll go next, or how do you think failure will fit into like the way we see innovation? Because I do think that's changing. And I do think, at least I would hope to think that like the way we appreciate the fringe thinkers is changing. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I think there'll be I think there will be organizations. I don't know if they'll be in legacy institutions. I think it's harder for older companies to change. it's not impossible, but I do think it's difficult for them.
Right.
But I think a lot of newer companies may actually build into their bedrock, hey, we need to know in your annual sort of contributions to the company what you've done that did not lead to a success. Because, Kelsey, I think they want to know what you've tried. And
Right.
you could call it a failure, or you could just say this never went anywhere. That I think most of us in marketing are used to. I mean, we call these A/B tests and, things that we've all done when it comes to sort of search marketing and other areas. It's a culture of experimentation. I think you'll have more of that at some companies where they'll actually start to question those who are not failing. Hey, have you done anything interesting? No, I did this and I hit it out of the ballpark. You know what? You're fired because we don't want all that. It's great that you're succeeding, but you're not taking any risks. You're not doing anything that might be interesting. We can't find the future unless we do that. I think we'll see more of that. I think there are companies cropping up right now wanting, more of that. I think what prevents companies from continuing with that culture is they IPO, they have shareholders to account to. However, I could see that model going away. I could see an entire new situation where, a company says, we're listed on the stock exchange. However, we do not report, we report quarterlies because we're required to by the SEC. However, here is our sort of 5-year report on where we're headed. And that will have a lot of, experiment and innovation built into it, which then attracts people who want to actually invest for the long term. Because if you think about it, Kelsey, what's really hurt business is people just invest for the short term in everything. And that's what's really, I think, caused so much carnage and disruption over the past, couple of decades, is people aren't thinking of like, if I make this step now, what does it mean for us in 5 or 10 years possibly? And so hopefully we'll start to see a little bit more of that, ingrain itself in business culture.
Yeah, I love that. And I hope so. So thank you for joining me. If anybody wants to learn more about you online or talk to you, where could they do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm pretty active on Twitter as well, at DJGEOFFE.
Sounds good. Well, and thank you to everyone who is listening. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, all that jazz. And until next time.
Thank you for listening to the StoryShout podcast. Don't forget to review us on iTunes and connect with us on social media at StoryShout or online at storyshout.co. Until next time, stay normal.